Before we begin, a quick disclaimer. This video is for informational and educational purposes only. The content presented is based on publicly available information, historical records, and news reports. It does not constitute financial, investment, or legal advice. Always conduct your own research and consult with qualified professionals before making any financial decisions. You get the bill in the mail, or more likely the email notification. You click it open, your eyes scan past the logo, and you find the number. And for a second you just stare. How did my internet and cable bill get this high? It's a ritual for tens of millions of Americans. A moment of quiet frustration aimed at one single name, Spectrum. But what if I told you that name is just a mask? A modern, clean brand name slapped onto a corporate entity forged in debt, bankruptcy, and a ruthless multi-decade war for the wires running into your home. The story of Spectrum, or more accurately Charter Communications, isn't just a boring business history. It's a story of ambition, betrayal, and a high-stakes gamble by a tech icon that went spectacularly wrong, leading to one of the largest corporate bankruptcies in American history. And by the end of this series, you won't just understand why your bill is what it is. You'll understand the very DNA of the company that has become the gatekeeper to the digital world for a massive portion of the United States. You'll understand the brutal calculus that built an empire. Our story doesn't start in a flashy Silicon Valley garage or a Wall Street boardroom. It starts in St. Louis, Missouri in 1980. The world of television was simple. You had a handful of broadcast channels, and if you were lucky, maybe a giant satellite dish in your backyard. But a quiet revolution was happening. Men in pickup trucks were stringing thick, black coaxial cables from telephone poles, promising dozens of channels, clear pictures, and a portal to a new world of entertainment. This was the Wild West of the cable television industry. And in St. Louis, three young executives at a company called Syncom Cable Associates were watching it all unfold. Their names were Barry Babcock, Gerald Kent, and Howard Wood. They weren't tech visionaries. They were grinders. They understood the dirty, unglamorous work of the cable business, negotiating with small towns for franchise rights, digging trenches, and managing a patchwork of tiny, disconnected cable systems. They were learning the game from the ground up. For 13 years, they toiled away at Syncom, helping build it into one of the top cable operators in the country. They learned a crucial lesson. The real money wasn't just in signing up customers. The real power, the real efficiency, and the real path to dominance was in something called clustering. Now, clustering sounds like a boring corporate buzzword, but I promise you, it is the secret key that unlocks the entire history of Charter Communications. So what is it? Imagine a map of the United States. In the 1980s, the cable industry was a mess of tiny dots on that map. One company might own the cable system in one small town. Another company, totally unrelated, would own the system in the town 10 miles down the road. This was incredibly inefficient. You needed separate offices, separate fleets of technicians, separate head ends. That's the facility where they receive all the TV signals. It was a logistical nightmare. Clustering was the simple but genius idea of buying up all the little systems in a specific geographic area and connecting them. Instead of owning one, you'd own a whole patch of the map. Suddenly, you could have one central office serve a dozen towns. You could have one team of technicians cover an entire region. Your marketing costs went down. Your operational costs plummeted. Your profit margins soared. More importantly, you created a local fortress, a mini monopoly. If you owned all the cable infrastructure in the St. Louis suburbs, who else was going to spend millions to come in and compete with you? Nobody. You owned the customer. Babcock, Kent, and Wood became masters of this strategy. They saw the future. So in 1993, when Syncom was sold to Hallmark Cards, yes, the greeting card company, for $1 billion, the trio didn't just cash out and retire. They took their share of the money, their encyclopedic knowledge of the cable industry, and that master strategy of clustering, and they started their own company. They called it Charter Communications. Their game plan was simple and aggressive. They weren't interested in the big, flashy markets like New York or Los Angeles. Those were already carved up by giants like Time Warner and TCI. Charter went for the leftovers. They targeted suburban and rural markets, the kinds of places the big players overlooked. They scoured the country for small family-owned cable systems that were ripe for a buyout. These were the mom-and-pop operations, systems with maybe 5,000 subscribers, often in need of serious upgrades. Charter would roll in, make a cash offer the family couldn't refuse, and absorb the system into their growing cluster. They'd buy a system in one town, then another one nearby, and then the one in between. They were like Pac-Man, gobbling up every pellet in a region until they controlled the entire board. They'd acquire a system, upgrade its technology, and then use the increased cash flow from that upgraded system as leverage to get loans to buy the next one, and the next one, and the next one. It was a cycle of acquire, upgrade, leverage, repeat. From 1993 to 1998, Charter Communications was on an absolute tear. They went public on the Nasdaq Stock Exchange, raising a war chest of cash from investors who were completely captivated by the explosive growth of the cable industry. The promise of 500 channels, video on demand, and the new magical thing called high-speed internet had Wall Street in a frenzy. Cable was seen as the essential infrastructure of the 21st century, the toll road for the information superhighway. And Charter, with its brilliant and ruthlessly effective clustering strategy, looked like one of the smartest bets in the game. By 1998, they had grown from a tiny St. Louis startup to a major player, with over 1 million customers. They were the rising stars of the industry. They were smart, disciplined, and had a proven formula for success. They were on top of the world. But they were about to attract the attention of someone with more money than they could possibly imagine. A man who didn't just want to build a cable company. He wanted to build a digital nervous system for the entire planet. A man whose vision was so grand, and whose wallet was so deep, that he would take Charter's aggressive growth strategy and inject it with pure rocket fuel. The co-founder of Microsoft, the billionaire tech visionary Paul Allen, was looking for his next big thing. And he had just set his sights on the humble little cable company from St. Louis. The era of disciplined growth was over. The era of the wired world was about to begin. And it would push Charter Communications to heights it had never imagined right before sending it crashing into the abyss. The year is 1998. The internet is a screeching dial-up novelty for most Americans. But for Paul Allen, the billionaire co-founder of Microsoft, it was the sound of the future. Allen wasn't just a tech mogul. He was a genuine visionary, a man who saw the digital horizon with stunning clarity. And what he saw was something he called the wired world. It was a grand, unified theory of the digital future, a world where a single fat pipeline of data, a broadband connection, would pump everything into your home. Not just television, not just a clunky, slow version of the internet. Everything. High-definition movies on demand, crystal-clear telephone calls, video conferencing, interactive gaming, online shopping, all flowing through one wire. He believed the company that controlled that wire would control the 21st century. And who owned the wires? Not the phone companies with their thin, twisted pair copper lines designed for voice. No, the companies with the real potential, the ones with thick coaxial cables already running into tens of millions of homes, were the cable companies. To Paul Allen, a cable company wasn't just a utility that showed reruns of Seinfeld. It was the skeleton key to the entire digital kingdom. He just needed to find the right one to start with. And in a quiet corner of St. Louis, a small, well-run, but unremarkable company called Charter Communications was about to get a phone call that would change its destiny forever. For $4.5 billion, Paul Allen bought control of Charter. To the founders, it was the payday of a lifetime. To Allen, it was merely the down payment on his dream. He didn't just want to own Charter. He wanted to transform it from a regional player into a national behemoth, the flagship of his wired world fleet. The mandate was simple and terrifying: grow and grow fast. Forget disciplined, careful expansion. This was a land grab. The dot-com bubble was inflating to epic proportions. Money was practically free for anyone with a tech-centric vision, and Allen was ready to spend. What followed was one of the most breathtaking acquisition sprees the industry had ever seen. It was a corporate blitzkrieg. In a little over a year, Charter became a vacuum cleaner for mid-sized cable operators across the country. The first big prize was a company called Falcon Cable, a major operator in California, for $3.6 billion. Then came Bresnan Communications, a respected company with systems across the Midwest, for $3.1 billion. The checks kept getting bigger. He snatched up intermedia partners, scooping up another 1.3 million subscribers. He bought systems from AT&T, from Cable USA, from Fanch Communications. It was a feeding frenzy. In just 24 months, Charter Communications went from a modest company with about 1 million subscribers to a sprawling empire serving nearly 7 million customers across 40 states. It became the fourth largest cable operator in the United States, seemingly overnight. Paul Allen had spent over $25 billion to assemble his coast-to-coast cable giant. Wall Street was euphoric. Analysts and tech gurus hailed Allen as a genius, the one man who truly understood where the world was heading. Charter's stock, which went public in November 1999, soared. Everything was going according to plan. To manage this newly minted empire, Allen brought in a new team. Gerald Kent, one of Charter's original founders, was initially kept on as CEO, a nod to the company's past. But the sheer scale of the new Charter was beyond anything he had ever managed. The real power now sat with the new executive, Carl Vogel, a seasoned industry veteran brought in as the new CEO in 2001. His job was less about visionary strategy and more about brute force integration. He had to somehow stitch together dozens of different, incompatible, and often neglected cable systems into a single functioning network. And this is where the wired world dream began to collide with a very messy reality. Paul Allen hadn't been buying pristine, state-of-the-art networks. He had been buying geography. He had been buying homes past. Many of the systems he acquired were old, technologically backward, and in desperate need of upgrades. They were like buying a fleet of classic cars. They looked great on paper, but getting them all running in sync was a nightmare. Some systems had limited channel capacity. Many weren't even capable of providing two-way internet access, the very foundation of Allen's vision. To make the wired world a reality, Charter had to spend billions more just to bring its own network up to speed. It was a money pit. They had to rip out old amplifiers, replace miles of coaxial cable, and install brand new digital headends in hundreds of local markets. All of this took time, and more importantly, it took astronomical amounts of capital that Charter didn't have. Because while Paul Allen was a billionaire, he hadn't bought Charter with his pocket money. He had bought it with debt. The $25 billion acquisition spree was financed almost entirely with borrowed money, loaded directly onto Charter's balance sheet. The company was now saddled with a mountain of debt so high it blotted out the sun. Every new cable system they bought came with its own existing debts, which were then piled onto the parent company. By the early 2000s, Charter's debt had ballooned to over $20 billion. The interest payments alone were staggering, costing the company hundreds of millions of dollars every quarter. For a moment, in the dizzying mania of the dot-com bubble, it didn't seem to matter. Growth was all that mattered. Subscriber numbers were the only metric Wall Street cared about. As long as the stock price was high and the economy was booming, you could always borrow more money to pay the interest on the money you'd already borrowed. The whole enterprise was a high-wire act, performed without a net, based on the assumption that the future would arrive on schedule, and the good times would never end. But the future is never on schedule, and the good times always end. As the new millennium dawned, the first tremors of a seismic shift were being felt. The tech-fueled euphoria that had defined the late 90s was starting to curdle into anxiety. The impossible valuations of companies with no profits and no plausible business models were beginning to look less like genius and more like insanity. The dot-com bubble, which had provided the cheap money and boundless optimism for Paul Allen's grand experiment, was starting to hiss. And for Charter Communications, a company built on a foundation of pure leverage, the consequences would be catastrophic. They had built their house at the peak of the market, using the most expensive materials, and financed it all with a variable rate loan. And the first interest payment was about to come due. The gleaming vision of the wired world was about to be short-circuited by the grim reality of the balance sheet. The air in the boardroom grew thin. The future, which had looked so bright and limitless through the lens of a fiber optic cable, was now a single terrifying number on a ledger. A number that was due. The variable rate loan, a clever financial tool in a stable economy, had become a ticking time bomb. And in the late 1980s, with interest rates climbing like a runaway freight train, that bomb was about to detonate. The dream of a 54-channel universe, of interactive services and a truly connected St. Louis, was facing a very analog threat: foreclosure. Charles Dolan and his partners had bet the farm, and the farm was about to be seized by the bank. They had built a Cadillac system in a world that was just learning to drive. The initial subscriber numbers were good, but they weren't nearly enough to cover the colossal interest payments. They were hemorrhaging cash. Desperate, they scrambled for a solution. They tried to get more financing, but the banks just laughed. Lending more money to a company that couldn't pay its first bill was financial suicide. They were trapped. Their ambition had written a check their reality couldn't cash. This was the great paradox of the 1980s cable boom. Just a few years earlier, in 1984, the U.S. government had passed the Cable Communications Policy Act. It was a landmark piece of legislation that essentially unshackled the industry. It deregulated cable rates, freeing companies to charge what they believed the market would bear. The goal was to spur investment, to encourage companies to take big risks, to build out the infrastructure that would wire America for the future. And it worked. A gold rush began. Cable systems became hot commodities, their value soaring overnight. It was this very deregulation that had emboldened Charter's founders to dream so big in St. Louis. But the same law that created the opportunity also created the sharks. With deregulation, Wall Street suddenly saw cable not as a utility, but as a cash machine. Larger companies began a feeding frenzy, gobbling up smaller operators, consolidating territories, and jacking up prices. They weren't interested in risky, futuristic experiments like Charter's Wired World. They were interested in predictable, recurring revenue, and they had deep pockets. As Charter was drowning, these larger, more disciplined operators were thriving. They saw Charter's predicament not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. Here was a state-of-the-art system, the best network money could buy, built by visionaries who frankly weren't very good at math. And it was about to go on sale for pennies on the dollar. The lifeline, when it came, wasn't from a bank. It was from their own kind. A consortium of 3 other cable operators, led by a St. Louis-based company called Syncom Cable Associates, made an offer. Syncom was run by Howard and Robert Wood, savvy businessmen who understood the cable industry inside and out. Unlike Dolan, they weren't poets of the coaxial cable. They were pragmatists. They saw the value locked inside Charter's overbuilt network, and they knew exactly how to extract it. The deal was brutal. It was a bailout, not a partnership. The consortium would pump in the desperately needed cash to save the company from bankruptcy. But in exchange, they demanded a controlling interest. The pioneers, the men who had sketched out the future on napkins and willed it into existence, would have to give up the keys to their kingdom. For Charles Dolan, it was a bitter pill to swallow. He and his partners would be relegated to minority shareholders, their vision and control stripped away. But the alternative was total annihilation. With no other options, they took the deal. The ink on the papers was barely dry before the culture at Charter changed. The dreamers were out, the managers were in. The era of ambitious expansion was over. The era of aggressive monetization had begun. Syncom's leadership looked at the St. Louis system not as a technological marvel, but as an underperforming asset. Their first order of business wasn't to launch new interactive services. It was to service the debt. And the fastest way to do that was to take full advantage of the 1984 Cable Act. Prices for subscribers began to climb. The focus shifted from building new networks to acquiring existing ones. Charter, now flush with cash from its new corporate parents and guided by a more conservative, acquisition-focused strategy, began to grow. But it was a different kind of growth. It wasn't about breaking new ground, it was about buying it. Throughout the late 80s and into the early 90s, the company, under the management of the consortium, began snapping up smaller, often rural cable systems across the country. They'd buy a system, streamline its operations, raise the rates, and use the profits to buy another. It was a simple, repeatable, and highly effective formula for growth in the deregulated cable landscape. The company was no longer a single, ambitious project in one county. It was becoming a patchwork quilt of disparate systems, a holding company for dozens of small-town cable franchises. Each acquisition added more subscribers, more revenue, and more debt to the balance sheet. The visionary DNA of its founding was being systematically replaced by the cold, calculating logic of mergers and acquisitions. Charter was saved, but the original Charter was gone. It had survived its near-death experience, but it emerged as a fundamentally different creature. It was leaner, meaner, and far more interested in its stock price than in building the wired world. This new version of Charter was perfectly adapted to its environment. The early 1990s were the Wild West of the cable industry. Consolidation was the name of the game. Giants like TCI and Time Warner were devouring competitors, and mid-sized players like Charter, under Syncom's guidance, were desperately trying to bulk up to avoid being eaten themselves. It was a game of scale. The more subscribers you had, the more leverage you had with programmers like HBO and ESPN. The more leverage you had, the better your margins. The better your margins, the more systems you could afford to buy. It was a virtuous cycle of acquisition. And so, the company that began as a dream in St. Louis became a portfolio of assets, a collection of franchise agreements and subscriber lists scattered across more than a dozen states. It was solvent. It was growing. It was, by all Wall Street metrics, a success. But the revolutionary spark was gone. The grand experiment was over. Charter had become just another cable company. But in the background, the world was changing again. A new technology was percolating in labs and universities. A global network of computers that promised to do everything the wired world was supposed to, and more. It was called the Internet. And in Seattle, a man who had made his fortune in the personal computer revolution was watching the cable industry with intense interest. He saw these companies not as television providers, but as owners of a crucial digital highway straight into the American home. He saw the immense potential of their broadband pipes, a potential that most old-school cable barons couldn't yet fathom. He had billions of dollars to spend and a vision of a future that made Charter's original plans look quaint. He was waiting for the right moment, for the right collection of assets to become available. And the sprawling, disconnected empire that Charter was busy building was starting to look very, very interesting. The company had been saved from one crisis, only to be set on a path that would lead it directly into the hands of a new kind of visionary, with a checkbook bigger than anyone could imagine. That visionary was Paul Allen. Yes, that Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft. A man who had helped build a software empire that was changing the world, and in the process had become one of the wealthiest human beings on the planet. By the late 1990s, Allen had long since left his day-to-day role at Microsoft. He was a man with billions of dollars in his pocket and a restless, brilliant mind, searching for the next great technological revolution. And he believed he had found it. Allen had a grand, all-encompassing vision he called the wired world. It was a future where every home was a node on a vast, interconnected network. A world where entertainment, communication, information, and commerce all flowed through a single high-capacity pipe. He saw a future of on-demand movies, interactive television, high-speed internet, and digital phone service, all delivered seamlessly to the living room. To us today, this sounds completely normal. It's the world we live in. But in 1998, when most of America was still listening to the screech and hiss of a dial-up modem to get online, Paul Allen's vision sounded like something straight out of science fiction. And to build this science fiction future, he needed infrastructure. He needed the physical pipes, the coaxial cables that already ran into tens of millions of American homes. He needed a cable company. Not just any cable company, but one he could shape and mold into the foundation of his wired world. He looked around the landscape and saw giants like TCI and Time Warner. But he also saw smaller, scrappier players. Players like Charter Communications. It was big enough to have a footprint but small enough to be acquired and transformed. It was the perfect vehicle. In 1998, Paul Allen, through his investment firm Vulcan Ventures, bought a controlling interest in Charter for a staggering $4.5 billion. For a company that had been juggling debt and fighting for survival just a few years earlier, it was an almost unbelievable price tag. But for Allen, this wasn't an endpoint. It was the starting pistol. He didn't just want to own Charter. He wanted to use its name and his checkbook to roll up a huge chunk of the American cable industry. What followed was one of the most aggressive, breathtaking acquisition sprees in corporate history. It was a blitzkrieg. Paul Allen handed the keys to Charter's management, pointed them at the map of the United States, and essentially said, "Go buy it." And they did. The ink was barely dry on the initial deal when Charter began swallowing other companies whole. They bought Marcus Cable, a major operator in the American South, for $2.8 billion, adding over 1 million subscribers in a single stroke. They bought Intermedia Partners, adding another 500,000 customers. They snapped up Rifkin Company and its 250,000 subscribers. They bought Falcon Cable for $3.6 billion, adding another 1 million homes to their network. They devoured smaller operators in California, the Southeast, and New England. Each deal was bigger than the last. The announcements came fast and furious, a relentless drumbeat of expansion. In just over a year, Charter Communications went from being a respectable mid-sized operator with around 1 million subscribers to a titan of the industry. By the end of this feeding frenzy, Charter was serving over 6.2 million customers. It had become the fourth largest cable operator in the United States, a coast-to-coast behemoth built in record time. Paul Allen was assembling the pieces of his wired world at a dizzying pace. He was a man in a hurry, convinced he was on the cusp of the next digital frontier, and he was willing to pay any price to get there first. But how was he paying for all this? Even for a billionaire like Paul Allen, we're talking about astronomical sums of money. The answer, of course, was debt. Every acquisition was financed with mountains of it. Charter was borrowing billions upon billions of dollars to fuel its hypergrowth. The company's balance sheet began to look terrifying. The assets were growing, yes, but the liabilities were exploding at an even faster rate. They were building a technological empire on a foundation of IOUs. This was the height of the dot-com bubble. The late 90s were a time of irrational exuberance. The stock market was soaring, fueled by a belief that the new economy of the internet had suspended the old rules of business. Profits didn't matter. Cash flow was an old-fashioned concern. All that mattered was growth. Get big fast. Capture eyeballs, capture market share, and worry about the details later. And no company embodied this philosophy more perfectly than Paul Allen's Charter Communications. Wall Street loved the story. A tech visionary, a co-founder of Microsoft, was building the very backbone of the internet age. It was a narrative they couldn't resist. And so, to raise even more cash and to give the early investors a chance to see a return, Allen and his team decided to take the company public. In November of 1999, Charter Communications launched its initial public offering, or IPO. It was a massive success. The company raised $3.5 billion, one of the largest IPOs in the cable industry's history. The stock, trading under the ticker symbol CHTR, popped on its first day. Analysts slapped buy ratings on it. The media celebrated Paul Allen's genius. He had taken a relatively obscure St. Louis cable firm and, in less than 2 years, transformed it into a publicly traded multi-billion-dollar giant that was at the forefront of the digital revolution. On the surface, everything looked incredible. Charter was a rocket ship. It had a visionary leader with deep pockets, a massive national footprint, and a stock that the market adored. They were aggressively upgrading their new systems, rolling out the high-speed internet and digital services that were the core of Allen's Wired World vision. They were not just a cable company anymore. They were a technology company, a broadband company, an indispensable part of the future. The party was in full swing, the music was loud, and it felt like it would never end. But deep within the company's financial statements, a time bomb was ticking. The debt from that whirlwind acquisition spree hadn't gone away. It was sitting there, a colossal figure that dwarfed the company's actual revenue. Charter was spending far more money than it was making. The entire enterprise was predicated on a single fragile assumption: that the growth would continue forever, that the stock market would keep climbing, and that they could always borrow more money or issue more stock to pay the bills. Paul Allen had successfully built his empire. He had assembled the physical network he needed to realize his dream of a wired world. But in his rush to build it, he had created a financial structure so precarious, so leveraged to the hilt, that the slightest tremor in the economy could bring the entire thing crashing down. And as the year 1999 came to a close and the world prepared to enter a new millennium, the ground beneath the entire tech industry was beginning to shake. The biggest party in a generation was about to come to a very abrupt and very painful end. The new millennium didn't arrive with a digital bang, but with a deafening crash. The dot-com bubble, an unprecedented economic balloon inflated with speculative cash and wild promises of a new digital frontier, didn't just leak, it exploded. In March of 2000, the tech-heavy Nasdaq index began a freefall that felt bottomless. Companies with billion-dollar valuations but no actual profits evaporated overnight. The digital gold rush was over, and the landscape was littered with the ghosts of forgotten startups. For Charter Communications, a company built entirely on the promise of that digital future, this wasn't just a market correction. It was an existential threat. Paul Allen's Wired World was predicated on two things: the ever-increasing value of his Microsoft stock to fund the dream, and the assumption that the internet economy would grow forever, creating limitless demand for his expensive broadband pipes. Suddenly, both pillars crumbled at once. Allen's personal fortune, while still immense, was hemorrhaging billions. And the market's appetite for funding capital-intensive, debt-heavy companies like Charter vanished. The music had stopped, but Charter was still on the hook for billions in acquisitions, with billions more needed to upgrade the very systems it had just bought. The pressure inside Charter's St. Louis headquarters became immense. They had gone public in November 1999 at the absolute peak of the frenzy. Now, just a few months later, the world was entirely different. Wall Street analysts, once cheerleaders for the growth-at-all-costs model, were now vultures, scrutinizing every single number on the balance sheet. And the only number that mattered was subscribers. Subscriber growth was the holy grail, the metric that proved the wired world was still being built, that the model was working. If that number stalled or worse, went down, Charter stock would be worthless, its access to credit would be cut off, and the entire multi-billion-dollar enterprise would collapse under the weight of its own debt. In this pressure cooker environment, a series of disastrous decisions were made. Faced with the impossible task of showing constant parabolic growth in a market that was rapidly cooling, some of Charter's top executives allegedly began to play a dangerous game. They couldn't magically create more paying customers out of thin air, but they could, it seemed, change the definition of what a customer was. An internal investigation and a later federal indictment would lay out a stunning scheme to artificially inflate subscriber numbers to deceive Wall Street and prop up the company's stock price. It was a shell game played with spreadsheets and databases. The most egregious tactic was simple, yet devastatingly effective: delaying the disconnection of customers who had already canceled their service. Say you called to cancel your cable in May. In a normal business, you'd be removed from the rolls. But at Charter, according to prosecutors, your account might be kept active on the books through June, July, or even August. For those few months, you were a ghost in the machine, a paying subscriber who wasn't actually paying. Multiply that by thousands of customers across the country, and you could manufacture the illusion of growth, or at least mask the reality of customer churn. It was a short-term fix, a way to hit the quarterly numbers demanded by investors, but it was a lie, and it was creating a phantom subscriber base that would eventually have to be accounted for. The deception allegedly didn't stop there. The company launched a massive marketing campaign offering new customers 3 free months of service. This is a standard practice. But what wasn't standard was how Charter allegedly booked the revenue. Instead of recognizing it as a marketing expense, they were accused of booking those free months as if they were actual paying subscribers, creating revenue on the books where none existed. It was the equivalent of a restaurant giving away free meals, and then telling its investors it had a record sales day. Furthermore, they were accused of playing fast and loose with their expenses. The cost of labor for things like installing new cable drops, a clear operational expense, was allegedly being capitalized. In simple terms, they were treating a regular, everyday cost of doing business as a long-term investment like building a new headquarters. This accounting trick made their short-term profits look much healthier than they actually were, further perpetuating the myth that the company was thriving in the midst of the tech collapse. For a time it worked. The numbers looked good enough to keep the wolves at bay. But you can only hide from reality for so long. By the summer of 2002, the whispers had started. Whistleblowers began to talk, and federal investigators took notice. The U.S. Attorney's Office and the Securities and Exchange Commission launched a full-blown investigation. What followed was the slow, methodical unraveling of the entire scheme. Federal agents descended on Charter's offices, seizing computers and subpoenaing records. The company was forced to launch its own internal audit, which confirmed the worst. Its subscriber numbers had been materially overstated for years. The fallout was swift and brutal. Charter's stock, which had debuted at $19 a share and peaked above $25, collapsed. It became a penny stock, trading for less than $1. The company's credibility on Wall Street was completely shattered. Then came the indictments. In July of 2003, a federal grand jury indicted 4 former executives: the Chief Operating Officer, David McCall, the Chief Financial Officer, Kent Kalkworth, and 2 other senior executives. They were dubbed the Charter Four, and they were charged with conspiracy, wire fraud, and mail fraud. The men who had been tasked with executing Paul Allen's grand vision were now facing the prospect of years in federal prison. The company itself admitted no wrongdoing, but agreed to cooperate fully with the government's investigation. It also had to restate its financial results for 2000 and 2001, effectively admitting to the world that its celebrated growth had been a mirage. The scandal cost the company tens of millions in legal fees and fines, but the damage to its reputation was incalculable. And where was Paul Allen in all of this? As chairman of the board, the buck ultimately stopped with him, but he was never charged with any wrongdoing. There was no evidence he was aware of the fraudulent accounting. He was the visionary, the big-picture guy, not the executive buried in the quarterly numbers. But that provided little comfort. His dream of a wired world had curdled into a nightmare of corporate malfeasance. The company he had poured billions into was now a national symbol of the dot-com era's worst excesses. He had lost a staggering $7 billion on his investment, and the company was still bleeding cash, burning through nearly $1 billion a year. Charter Communications was now on life support. Its stock was worthless. Its brand was toxic. Its top management was disgraced and facing jail time. And its billionaire benefactor was watching his personal fortune and his grandest ambition circle the drain. He was faced with a monumental choice. Walk away, cut his losses, and let the company die a quiet, ignominious death, or double down. He could pour hundreds of millions, perhaps even billions more of his own money into this black hole, in a desperate gamble to salvage something from the wreckage. For Charter, the battle was no longer about growth or conquering the digital frontier. It was now a brutal day-to-day fight for simple survival. The year is 2002. The glittering promise of the digital age has shattered. For Charter Communications, the hangover from the dot-com party is a brutal, throbbing migraine of debt. The company is hemorrhaging cash, losing nearly $1 million a day. Its stock, once a high flyer, is now worth less than a gumball. It has become a penny stock, a symbol of catastrophic failure. And at the center of it all is Paul Allen, the Microsoft co-founder, the visionary, now looking at a $7 billion hole in his personal fortune. He had poured his wealth into the dream of a wired world, and now that dream was a financial black hole, threatening to swallow him whole. The board knew something had to change. The era of unchecked, debt-fueled expansion was over. They needed a different kind of leader. Not a visionary, not a builder, but a cleaner. A corporate surgeon who wasn't afraid to amputate to save the patient. They found their man in Carl Vogel. Vogel was a cable industry veteran, a numbers guy known for his brutal efficiency. He wasn't there to inspire employees or dream up the next big thing. His mandate was simple and grim: stop the bleeding. Vogel arrived at Charter's St. Louis headquarters and immediately went to work. He took one look at the sprawling, chaotic empire Jerry Kent and Paul Allen had built and started sharpening his knives. The first cuts were deep and painful. Thousands of employees were laid off. Call centers were consolidated. Entire departments deemed non-essential were simply eliminated. The company jet was sold. Extravagant corporate retreats became a distant memory. Every single expense, from paper clips to truck maintenance, was scrutinized, questioned, and slashed. The goal wasn't to be a great company. It was to still be a company by next quarter. Next, Vogel looked at the map of Charter's assets. It was a patchwork quilt of systems bought in a frenzy, many of them in rural, less profitable areas. He began a process the company called asset rationalization. It was a sterile corporate term for a painful retreat. Charter started selling off entire cable systems, abandoning the very territories they had spent billions to acquire just a few years earlier. They sold their operations in places like Southern California and the Central Atlantic states, pulling back to a more defensible, more profitable core. Each sale was an admission of failure, a dismantling of Paul Allen's grand vision, but it brought in precious cash to pay the interest on their mountain of debt. This period of extreme austerity had a profound and lasting impact on the one group Charter couldn't afford to lose: its customers. With a skeleton crew of technicians and call center reps, service quality plummeted. Wait times on the phone stretched into hours. Getting a technician to your house could take weeks. The focus was entirely on the balance sheet, not the customer experience. If a choice had to be made between upgrading a network hub or making a debt payment, the debt always won. This is where the seeds of Spectrum's modern reputation for frustrating customer service were sown. Not out of malice, but out of pure, desperate financial necessity. They were too broke to be better. While Vogel was performing this corporate triage, a new strategy was emerging as the potential savior for the entire cable industry. It was called the triple play. The idea was simple but revolutionary. Instead of just selling you television and maybe a separate clunky internet connection, a cable company could offer you everything: digital cable TV, high-speed internet, and now home phone service, all on one bill from one provider. The technology that made this possible was VoIP, or Voice over Internet Protocol. It allowed phone calls to travel over the same coaxial cable that delivered internet and TV, eliminating the need for the traditional telephone company's copper wires. For customers, the appeal was convenience and theoretically a lower price for bundling all three services. For cable companies like Charter, it was a lifeline. The triple play was the ultimate customer retention tool. It created what insiders called stickiness. If a customer only had your TV service, it was easy for them to switch to a satellite provider like DirecTV. But if they had your TV, your internet, and your phone number, the hassle of switching all three services at once was immense. You'd have to coordinate 3 different installations, transfer your home phone number, and deal with multiple companies. Most people wouldn't bother. By wrapping customers in a bundle of services, Charter could build a defensive moat around its customer base, drastically reducing churn and stabilizing its revenue. Charter, despite its financial ruin, had one crucial advantage: its network. The billions Paul Allen had spent on upgrades meant that, in many of its core markets, Charter had the raw bandwidth to deliver the triple play. So, even as Carl Vogel was cutting the company to the bone, he was also pushing hard to roll out digital phone service. It was a race against time. They needed to sign up as many triple play customers as they could, locking them in before the company's finances completely imploded. But here was the brutal reality. It wasn't enough. The cost-cutting, the asset sales, the promise of the triple play. They were all just buckets bailing water out of a battleship with a gaping hole in its hull. That hole was $21 billion of debt. The interest payments alone were staggering, a relentless, crushing weight on the company's chest. Every dollar of profit they managed to squeeze out was immediately consumed by the banks. They were running faster and faster just to stay in the same place. For Paul Allen, this was a slow-motion nightmare. His dream of the wired world had devolved into a desperate game of financial engineering. He was no longer a tech visionary. He was the owner of a deeply distressed asset, watching his turnaround CEO dismantle his creation piece by piece just to keep the lights on. He had to approve the layoffs, the asset sales, the very retreat from the vision he'd bet his fortune on. By 2008, the wider economy was beginning to crumble, presaging the Great Recession. For a company as fragile and indebted as Charter, this was the final push towards the cliff. Credit markets froze, making it impossible to refinance their loans. Revenue growth slowed as customers, feeling the economic pinch, started cutting back. Carl Vogel had done everything he could. He had stemmed the bleeding, stabilized the patient, and even found a potential path to recovery with the triple play. But he couldn't make a $21 billion anchor disappear. The math was no longer just difficult, it was impossible. The company's liabilities massively outweighed its assets. Its debt was more than 8 times its annual cash flow, a ratio that screamed insolvency. The whispers in the financial world grew to a roar. There was only one option left, one final, drastic move to save the company from being liquidated and sold for parts. It was a word that represented the ultimate corporate failure, a public admission that the grand experiment had gone catastrophically wrong. The company had to declare bankruptcy. On March 27, 2009, Charter Communications filed for Chapter 11 protection. It was, at the time, one of the largest and most complex bankruptcies in American corporate history. The numbers were simply staggering. The company listed assets of $25 billion, but it was suffocating under liabilities of $24 billion, with $21 billion of that being long-term debt. Think about that. For every dollar of stuff the company owned, it owed someone almost $1 back. There was no room to breathe, no money to invest, no path forward. The house of cards, built on a mountain of junk bonds and overly optimistic projections, had finally collapsed. For Paul Allen, it was the final crushing blow to his cable television dream. The man who had co-founded Microsoft, who had changed the world of computing, had poured an estimated $8 billion of his personal fortune into Charter. And with the stroke of a pen on a bankruptcy filing, that entire investment was essentially vaporized. In the brutal calculus of Chapter 11, the existing shareholders are the last in line to get paid, and when a company is this deep in the red, there's nothing left for them. His common stock, once representing a controlling stake in the nation's third-largest cable company, was now worthless. The billionaire visionary was wiped out. But this wasn't a liquidation. Chapter 11 isn't a funeral. It's a radical, painful surgery. The goal is to keep the business alive, to restructure the debt so the company can function again. And Charter had a plan. This was what's known as a prepackaged bankruptcy. For months leading up to the filing, Tom Rutledge and his team had been in grueling, backroom negotiations with the people they owed money to: the bondholders, the hedge funds, and the banks. The deal they hammered out was a classic debt for equity swap. Imagine you lend a friend $100,000 to buy a house, and they can't pay you back. Instead of foreclosing, you agree to a deal. You forgive the debt, and in exchange they give you ownership of the house. That's essentially what happened to Charter, but on a multi-billion-dollar scale. The bondholders, who were owed billions, agreed to forgive a huge chunk of that debt. In exchange, they would be given shares in the new, reorganized Charter Communications. The lenders were becoming the owners. The creditors were taking over the company. This plan was designed to surgically remove the cancer that was killing Charter: its debt load. The goal was to slash it by a full $8 billion, from $21 billion down to a more manageable $13 billion. It was an audacious plan, and it was deeply controversial. A group of senior lenders, led by JP Chase, fought it tooth and nail. They argued the plan unfairly favored certain bondholders over others. The battle raged in court for months, a high-stakes legal drama that would determine the very future of the company. Millions of Americans had no idea that the fate of their internet and cable service was being decided in a Delaware bankruptcy court. Finally, in November of 2009, after 8 months of legal warfare, the judge approved the plan. Charter Communications officially emerged from bankruptcy. It was alive, but it was a completely different animal. The old Charter, the one driven by Paul Allen's ambitious, almost reckless pursuit of a wired world, was gone forever. In its place stood a new company, forged in the fires of financial failure. The new owners weren't tech visionaries. They were Wall Street firms like Apollo Management and Oaktree Capital. These were not dreamers. They were pragmatic, disciplined, and utterly focused on one thing: return on investment. And the man they trusted to deliver that return was Tom Rutledge. He had successfully navigated the company through its darkest hour. Now, with a cleaned-up balance sheet and new, demanding bosses, his mission was clear: make Charter profitable. The era of growth at any cost was over. The era of operational excellence had begun. Rutledge's strategy was a masterclass in corporate turnaround. He didn't chase flashy new technologies or expensive acquisitions. Instead, he focused on fundamentals, on fixing the core business that had been neglected for so long. His first major initiative was a project that sounded boring, but was absolutely revolutionary for the company: the all-digital transition. For years, Charter, like all cable companies, had been broadcasting in both analog and digital formats. Analog was the old-school way, the way TV had been delivered for decades. But it was a bandwidth hog. A single analog channel took up the same amount of space on the cable line as 10 or more high-definition digital channels. Rutledge saw this inefficiency as a massive opportunity. He initiated a company-wide push to convert the entire network to all digital. This was no small feat. It meant every single television in every single customer's home needed a digital set-top box or a special adapter to receive the new signal. It was a logistical nightmare and a huge capital expense. Charter had to manufacture and distribute millions of these boxes. Customers were confused and often angry. Why did they suddenly need a new piece of equipment for the TV in their guest room that had worked fine for 15 years? It was a painful short-term process, but Rutledge knew it was the key to the long-term future. Because the prize wasn't just about offering more HD channels. The real prize was the bandwidth it freed up. By eliminating those fat, inefficient analog signals, Charter suddenly had a vast open highway of digital capacity running into every home it served. And Rutledge knew exactly what to do with that highway. He was going to use it to dominate the one product that was becoming more important than television itself: high-speed internet. The post-bankruptcy strategy was a fundamental pivot. Charter would stop thinking of itself as a TV company that also sold internet. It would become an internet company that also sold TV. Rutledge poured resources into upgrading the network, boosting speeds, and improving reliability. While competitors like AT&T and Verizon were spending billions building out their new fiber optic networks, Rutledge realized Charter was already sitting on a gold mine. The existing coaxial cable lines, once supercharged by the digital transition, could deliver speeds that were just as fast or even faster than what the telephone companies were offering, and at a fraction of the cost. This focus on the internet as the primary product changed everything. It changed marketing, it changed technician training, it changed the entire financial model of the company. Cable TV was still a massive cash cow, providing the revenue needed to fund these upgrades. But everyone could see the writing on the wall. Cord cutting was no longer a fringe idea. It was a growing trend. The future wasn't in selling bundles of channels people didn't watch. The future was in providing the fastest, most reliable connection to the internet, the new utility of the 21st century. Under the watchful eye of its new private equity owners, the new Charter became a lean, efficient, and disciplined machine. The company that had once been a symbol of corporate excess was now a model of operational focus. It quietly got to work, upgrading its network town by town, improving customer service, and slowly but surely, winning back the trust of both its subscribers and Wall Street. For the first time in a decade, the company was on solid financial footing. It was no longer drowning in debt. It was no longer a victim. The near-death experience of bankruptcy had forged a new identity. The fat was trimmed, the mission was clear, and the leadership was battle-hardened. The company spent the next few years in this rebuilding phase, staying out of the headlines, consolidating its gains, and preparing for its next move. It had survived the abyss. It had been restructured, refinanced, and reborn. And as the rest of the cable industry began a massive wave of consolidation, the new, stronger Charter wasn't going to be a target. It was getting ready to become the hunter. The year is 2010. Charter Communications has just stepped out of the largest bankruptcy in the history of the cable industry. It's leaner, its balance sheet is cleaner, but it's still a distant fourth-place player in a game of giants. Ahead of it loom Comcast, Time Warner Cable, and the privately held Cox Communications. The industry is on the brink of a massive shift. The old model of just selling cable TV was dying. The future was broadband internet, and the companies that controlled the pipes into American homes would control the future. To win that game, you needed scale. You needed to be massive, and everyone knew a new wave of consolidation was coming. Charter's CEO, Tom Rutledge, a sharp, seasoned cable veteran who had previously built Cablevision into a powerhouse, saw the writing on the wall. He knew Charter couldn't just survive, it had to grow. And sitting right there as the second largest player was the ultimate prize, Time Warner Cable. TWC was a sprawling empire with a notoriously poor reputation for customer service, but it had millions of subscribers in key markets like New York City and Los Angeles. Rutledge, backed by the strategic vision of John Malone and Liberty Media, began quietly exploring a takeover. It was an audacious plan, the fourth largest player trying to swallow the second largest. It was a minnow trying to eat a whale. But before they could make their move, the real whale entered the water. In February 2014, Comcast, the undisputed king of the industry, announced a deal that sent shockwaves through the entire media landscape. They were going to buy Time Warner Cable for $45 billion. If this deal went through, the combined company would be an unprecedented behemoth. It would control over a third of the pay-TV market, and more critically, nearly 40% of the nation's high-speed broadband connections. In some markets, it would control over half. For Charter, it looked like game over. Their primary acquisition target was gone, and their biggest competitor was about to become an untouchable titan. But John Malone, the cable cowboy, wasn't one to give up. He and Rutledge watched and waited, because they knew this deal wasn't just a business transaction. It was a political firestorm waiting to happen. The opposition was immediate and fierce. Consumer advocacy groups, politicians, and content companies like Netflix all raised the alarm. Their argument was simple. A combined Comcast-Time Warner Cable would have too much power. It would be a gatekeeper to the internet. With its vast control over the physical infrastructure, it could favor its own content, slow down competing streaming services, and raise prices for consumers who had no other choice for high-speed internet. The public backlash was unlike anything the industry had ever seen. For years, Americans had been stewing in frustration over poor service, confusing bills, and endlessly rising prices from their cable providers. Comcast and Time Warner Cable consistently ranked at the very bottom of nearly every customer satisfaction survey in any industry. They were, to put it mildly, two of the most hated companies in America. The idea of these two villains joining forces was a nightmare scenario for millions. The hashtag ComcastTWC trended for days, filled with horror stories and desperate pleas to regulators. Comedian John Oliver dedicated a now legendary segment of his show to the issue of net neutrality and the proposed merger, urging viewers to flood the FCC's website with comments. So many people responded that they crashed the government servers. Inside the halls of the Federal Communications Commission and the Department of Justice, regulators were listening. The FCC, led by Chairman Tom Wheeler, was particularly concerned. The deal wasn't just about cable TV anymore. It was about the future of the open internet. Wheeler and his team saw a company that would not only be the largest cable and broadband provider, but would also own a massive content studio, NBC Universal. This vertical integration gave the new company both the means and the motive to harm its competitors. They could, for instance, make it difficult for a new streaming service to get off the ground or charge exorbitant fees to companies like Netflix for reliable access to their customers. For over a year, Comcast spent hundreds of millions of dollars on lobbying and public relations, trying to convince Washington that the deal was pro-consumer. They argued that because Comcast and Time Warner Cable rarely competed directly in the same markets, the merger wouldn't reduce consumer choice. But regulators weren't buying it. The problem wasn't the loss of direct competition. The problem was the creation of a single, nationwide gatekeeper with too much leverage over the entire internet ecosystem. In April 2015, the tide turned decisively. News leaked that the staff at the Department of Justice were recommending the deal be blocked. Soon after, the FCC indicated it would also move to stop the merger. The political will had evaporated. The regulatory wall was impassable. Facing certain defeat, Comcast officially withdrew its offer. The $45 billion behemoth was dead. The public, the regulators, and a British comedian had stared down the giant of the industry, and the giant had blinked. And in the shadows, Tom Rutledge and John Malone were ready to pounce. The moment Comcast walked away, the door flew wide open. Time Warner Cable was back in play, and this time, Charter was the only serious suitor. Less than a month after the Comcast deal collapsed, in May 2015, Charter announced its own blockbuster plan. They would acquire Time Warner Cable for a staggering $78 billion, a much higher price than Comcast had offered, reflecting a mix of cash and stock. But that wasn't all. In a brilliant strategic move, Charter also announced it would acquire a smaller, but highly regarded cable company called Bright House Networks for another $10 billion. This was a three-way mega-merger. If approved, it would instantly transform Charter from a distant fourth-place player into the second-largest cable and broadband provider in the nation, leapfrogging everyone to stand as the only true rival to Comcast. Immediately, the question on everyone's mind was, why would this deal be approved when the last one was so spectacularly rejected? Charter's argument was masterful. They framed their proposal as the anti-Comcast deal. First, they were smaller. The combined Charter TWC Bright House entity would have about 24 million customers. That's a huge number, but it was significantly less than the 33 million Comcast would have had. It kept them below the crucial 30% market share threshold that regulators worried about. Second, Charter didn't own a major content studio like NBC Universal. This eliminated the vertical integration concerns that had plagued the Comcast deal. Charter's business was delivering service, not creating the shows and movies that ran on it. They could credibly argue they had no incentive to discriminate against content providers like Netflix. Finally, and most importantly, Charter came to the table with a list of pro-consumer promises. They voluntarily committed to the FCC that for 7 years, they would not implement any data caps or usage-based pricing on their internet plans. They promised to continue respecting net neutrality principles, regardless of what future court battles might decide. And they committed to investing billions to build out their network and bring high-speed internet to 2 million new homes, many in underserved rural areas. They were telling regulators, "We are not Comcast. We are the good guys. Approve this deal, and we will be a powerful pro-consumer competitor that keeps the biggest player in check." It worked. After another year of regulatory review, the Department of Justice and the FCC gave their blessing. In May of 2016, the deal was done. Charter Communications had swallowed both Time Warner Cable and Bright House Networks. Overnight, the company more than tripled in size. It now served vast territories from California to the Carolinas, from New York City to Texas. But Tom Rutledge knew that simply owning these assets wasn't enough. He had just acquired 2 companies, one of which, Time Warner Cable, was a national punchline for terrible service. He couldn't just keep the old names. He needed a fresh start, a clean slate. He needed to signal to tens of millions of frustrated customers that things were about to be different. And so, he announced that the tarnished Time Warner Cable and Bright House brands would be retired. A new brand would be born from their ashes. A brand that promised speed, reliability, and value. A brand that would unify the entire, sprawling empire under one name, Spectrum. The hunt was over. Charter had become a titan. But now came the truly monumental task: integrating 3 massive, complex companies with different technologies, different billing systems, and vastly different corporate cultures. The promise of Spectrum was bright, but the reality of delivering on that promise would be the company's next great war. The challenge wasn't just about getting bigger, it was about becoming one. And in the immediate aftermath of the merger, Charter was anything but. It was a digital Frankenstein, the head of Charter, the torso of Time Warner Cable, and the limbs of Bright House Networks, all stitched together and shocked into life with a $100 billion jolt of electricity. The first sign of trouble for customers wasn't a grand strategic shift. It was chaos, plain and simple. Billing systems, designed by different companies in different decades, refused to talk to each other. A customer in a former Time Warner Cable area in Los Angeles might call for support, only to be routed to a call center in St. Louis that was still operating on old Charter software, completely unable to even view their account. Technicians would arrive at a home with equipment meant for one system, only to find the house was wired for another. Prices advertised in one neighborhood didn't apply to the next, even though they were now, supposedly, under the same company. For millions of Americans, the first taste of this new mega company was a bitter one. It felt less like a seamless upgrade and more like a hostile takeover of their monthly bill. And to fight this perception, to force a sense of unity where none yet existed, Charter made a momentous decision. They would kill the past. The names Time Warner Cable and Bright House Networks, names that carried decades of brand recognition and plenty of baggage, were to be scrubbed from existence. Every van, every uniform, every bill, every webpage would be rebranded under a single unified identity: Spectrum. The logic was sound. You can't build a new empire under old flags. The name Spectrum was meant to evoke a wide range of services, a full spectrum of connectivity. It was clean, modern, and most importantly, it wasn't Time Warner Cable, a name that had become a national punchline for poor customer service. But a new name doesn't fix a broken system. In fact, for a while it made things worse. People who hated their Time Warner Cable service suddenly started getting bills from a company they'd never heard of, charging them for the same, often problematic service. The rebranding was a massive, expensive marketing campaign, but on the ground it was just a new coat of paint on a machine whose gears were grinding violently. Behind the scenes, the integration was a technical and logistical nightmare. Imagine trying to merge the IT infrastructure of 3 different Fortune 500 companies simultaneously. Time Warner Cable primarily used a billing and customer management system called CSG. Charter used another called ICOMS. They were fundamentally incompatible, migrating over 25 million customer accounts from one system to another without massive data loss. Billing errors and service interruptions was one of the largest and most complex data migration projects in corporate history. It was a painstaking market-by-market process that would take years to complete. Every single customer account had to be individually mapped and moved. A single error could mean someone's internet gets cut off, or their bill suddenly triples. This was the unseen war. A war fought by armies of programmers, network engineers, and data analysts, deep in corporate data centers. They had to consolidate thousands of local cable headends, the facilities where all the TV signals and internet data are processed and sent out. They had to standardize the set-top boxes, the modems, the remote controls. A box that worked in Austin, a Time Warner Cable city, might not work in St. Louis, a Charter city. This meant replacing millions of pieces of customer equipment, a slow, frustrating, and incredibly expensive process. The promise of Spectrum was a simple, unified experience. The reality was a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar brute force effort to hammer 3 mismatched companies into one. But the war wasn't just fought with code and coaxial cable. It was also fought on the streets. In March of 2017, nearly 1,800 technicians and field workers in New York City and New Jersey, members of the IBEW Local 3 union, went on strike. These were the former Time Warner Cable employees who had been inherited by Charter in the merger. The dispute was bitter and deeply personal. Charter wanted to replace the union's pension and medical plans with a company-controlled 401k and healthcare plan. The company argued it was modernizing benefits and bringing them in line with the rest of the Charter workforce. The union saw it as a betrayal, a corporate giant using the merger as an excuse to gut the benefits they had fought for over decades. They expected a tough negotiation. They didn't expect a 5-year-long siege. Charter refused to budge. They brought in replacement workers from across the country, leading to tense, ugly confrontations on picket lines. The union accused the company of using inexperienced, non-local contractors, leading to a decline in service quality and safety. 4 years, the strike dragged on, becoming one of the longest in modern American history. It was a black eye for the newly branded Spectrum, a symbol of a company that seemed to be at war not just with its own internal complexity, but with its own workforce. The human cost of the merger was now on full display, every single day, on the sidewalks of the nation's largest city. And if that wasn't enough, another powerful enemy was emerging. The very government bodies that had approved the merger were now having second thoughts. By far the most aggressive was the New York State Public Service Commission. As a condition for approving the merger, Charter had made specific, legally binding promises. One of the biggest was a commitment to expand its high-speed internet network to 145,000 unserved or underserved homes and businesses in upstate New York within 4 years. It was a key public benefit that helped justify the creation of such a massive company. But by 2018, the state of New York was furious. They accused Charter of repeatedly missing its deadlines and of trying to fudge the numbers, claiming addresses that already had service as new build-outs. The relationship deteriorated rapidly. The PSC fined Charter millions of dollars. But then they took an unprecedented, almost unthinkable step. In July 2018, the New York State Public Service Commission voted to revoke its approval of the merger entirely. They ordered Charter Communications to sell off its entire New York operation, the legacy Time Warner cable system, and get out of the state. It was a corporate death sentence in one of the most valuable markets in the world. The message was clear. You made promises to get this deal done, and we are going to hold you to them. A frantic, high-stakes battle ensued. Charter's lawyers argued that kicking them out would cause mass chaos for millions of customers and was an illegal overreach of the Commission's authority. The state held firm, arguing that Charter had proven itself to be an untrustworthy partner. For over a year, the fate of Spectrum in New York hung in the balance. Eventually, they reached a settlement. Charter would pay more fines and commit to an even more aggressive and verifiable build-out plan. They had survived, but the fight exposed a deep-seated distrust between the company and the regulators who were supposed to police it. Amidst this storm of internal chaos, labor strife, and regulatory warfare, a new Charter strategy was finally beginning to emerge. Tom Rutledge's vision was one of aggressive simplicity. He wanted to end the cable industry's hated practice of confusing promotional pricing that would skyrocket after a year. The new Spectrum pricing model was straightforward: a flat, non-promotional rate for different internet speed tiers. The price you saw was the price you paid. They relentlessly pushed their triple play bundle of TV, internet, and phone, but the real focus was on connectivity. The crown jewel of this new strategy was mobile. In 2018, the company launched Spectrum Mobile. This wasn't a half-hearted effort. Using a special agreement that was part of a decade-old deal with Verizon Wireless, Charter could use Verizon's best-in-class cellular network to offer its own branded mobile service. This was a game-changer. They could now offer a quadruple play: a full bundle of home internet, TV, home phone, and mobile phone service, all on one bill, often at a significant discount. It was a powerful tool for customer retention. If your home internet and all your family's cell phones are with one company, the hassle of switching becomes immense. This was the company that had finally crawled out of the wreckage of the merger. It was bigger, leaner, and more strategically focused than ever before. It had survived a war on three fronts: a technical war of integration, a labor war with its own employees, and a political war with regulators. The Spectrum brand, baptized in fire, was now a nationwide reality. But the scars of that war remained. The company had standardized its technology and its pricing, but it had also cultivated a reputation for being a ruthless, hard-nosed operator. It had built a powerful machine for bundling services and locking in customers, but the question lingered: had it actually built a better company, or just a bigger one? The foundation was set, but the new world of 5G, fiber optics, and streaming was dawning, promising a new war that would test this freshly forged empire like never before. The ink on the Time Warner Cable and Bright House deals was barely dry when the real work began. The new behemoth, now controlling a vast swathe of the American cable market, needed a single name, a unified identity to erase the ghosts of companies past. And so, Spectrum was born. It was a brilliant piece of marketing, a name that evoked a wide range of possibilities, of light, of data, of entertainment. The old, often tarnished brands of Charter, Time Warner Cable, and Bright House were retired, replaced by a sleek, modern logo and a promise of a better, faster, more reliable future. But rebranding a fleet of trucks and sending out new bills is the easy part. Merging the cultures, technologies, and most importantly, the sprawling, aging networks of three different companies was a Herculean task. For CEO Tom Rutledge, the mission was clear: standardize everything. From the channel lineup to the modem you received, the goal was an all-digital, streamlined experience. This meant aggressively phasing out old analog cable boxes, a move that frustrated some older customers, but was essential for freeing up bandwidth. That bandwidth was the lifeblood of their entire strategy, because while the merger made them a cable television giant, the real prize, the undisputed king of the balance sheet, was broadband internet. The world was cutting the cord, and Charter knew it. They weren't just competing with DirecTV anymore. They were competing with Netflix, with Hulu, with 1,000 different ways to get entertainment that didn't involve their traditional video package. This was the great paradox of the modern cable company. The very internet service they provided was enabling the competition that was gutting their most profitable legacy business. Charter's response was a strategic pivot. They couldn't stop cord cutting, so they decided to lean into it. The new mantra became, "We are a connectivity company first." The goal was no longer to just sell you a massive, expensive bundle of channels you didn't watch. The goal was to become the indispensable pipe into your home. They dramatically simplified their internet offerings, focusing on high-speed tiers with no data caps, a major differentiator from competitors like Comcast. The message was simple: get our internet and then use it for whatever you want. If you want our TV package, great. If you want to use it to stream Netflix and YouTube TV, that's fine too. As long as you're paying that monthly internet bill, you're a Spectrum customer. But even that strategy was under siege. The ground beneath Charter's feet was shifting, quite literally. The hybrid fiber coaxial network that had been the backbone of the cable industry for decades was facing a new, existential threat: pure fiber to the home. Companies like Verizon with FiOS and a growing number of municipal and independent providers were laying glass strands directly to people's doorsteps, offering symmetrical gigabit speeds, just as fast for uploading as for downloading. This was a technological leap that Charter's existing infrastructure couldn't easily match. They were facing a multi-billion-dollar question. Do we spend a fortune to rip up and replace our entire network with fiber? Or can we squeeze even more life out of the coaxial cable we already have? Charter chose the latter, betting on a strategy of evolution, not revolution. They began a massive, nationwide upgrade of their network, a project they called a high-split architecture. In simple terms, this involved re-engineering their existing network to dedicate more frequencies to upstream traffic, allowing them to eventually offer multi-gig symmetrical speeds over their existing lines. It was a colossal, expensive gamble, a bet that they could upgrade their coax network faster and more cheaply than their competitors could build new fiber ones. It was a race against time and technology, a fight to prove that the old workhorse of the internet age still had a few more laps left to run. And just as they were fighting a war on the ground with fiber, a new war began in the air. The wireless carriers, T-Mobile and Verizon, armed with their new 5G networks, started offering a radical new product: 5G home internet. Suddenly, there was a viable wireless alternative to a physical cable line. For the first time in many areas, Spectrum had a legitimate, powerful competitor for its core broadband product. It was a direct assault on their castle. But Charter, learning the lessons of its past, didn't just play defense. It went on the attack. In 2018, they launched Spectrum Mobile. Using a clever deal known as an MVNO, or Mobile Virtual Network Operator, Charter essentially rented space on Verizon's best-in-class wireless network. They didn't have to build a single cell tower. This move was a masterstroke. It allowed them to bundle mobile service with home internet, often at a steep discount. This did two critical things. First, it made their customers stickier. A customer with both home internet and 2 mobile lines from Spectrum is far less likely to switch any of their services. Second, it turned a threat into a massive growth engine. Spectrum Mobile became the fastest-growing mobile provider in the country for a time, adding millions of subscribers and creating a powerful new revenue stream out of thin air. They had successfully weaponized their massive broadband customer base to fight a proxy war in the wireless space. Yet, even as the company grew into a technological and financial powerhouse, its public perception often lagged. The name Spectrum may have been new, but for many customers, it was the same old story of the cable company. Complaints about customer service, surprise fees, and annual price hikes remained a constant thorn in its side. This was magnified by a bitter years-long strike by IBEW Local 3 union workers in New York City that began in 2017. The dispute became a public relations nightmare, painting a picture of a corporate giant at odds with its own workforce, a narrative that was difficult to shake. Charter had become so big, so essential, that it was now a permanent fixture in the political and social landscape, subject to the same scrutiny and criticism as the power company or the water department. This new reality came to a head in the late summer of 2023, in a dramatic showdown that captivated the entire media industry. As millions of Americans settled in to watch college football and the US Open, their screens suddenly went dark. ESPN, ABC, and all other Disney-owned channels had vanished from Spectrum. This wasn't just another contract dispute. This was a declaration of war over the future of television. For years, companies like Disney had forced cable providers to take all of their channels in a bundle, including expensive sports networks and niche channels with low viewership, driving up the cost for everyone. At the same time, Disney was building its own streaming empire with Disney Plus and Hulu, directly competing with Spectrum for viewers' attention and wallets. Charter drew a line in the sand. In a stunningly candid presentation to investors, the company essentially said the old model is broken. They argued that they shouldn't have to force their customers to pay for channels they don't watch, especially when the content owner is also their direct competitor. They demanded a new model, more flexibility, a cut of streaming revenue, and a partnership for the future. For nearly 2 weeks, the screens remained black. It was a high-stakes game of chicken, and Charter didn't flinch. The final deal they struck was revolutionary. While they agreed to pay higher rates, they also won the ability to include the ad-supported version of Disney Plus in some of their TV packages. They had successfully breached the wall between traditional cable and streaming, forcing a new kind of partnership. It was a sign that Charter was no longer just a passive pipeline for content. It was an active, aggressive gatekeeper willing to use its immense leverage to reshape the media landscape in its favor. The story of Charter Communications, from its humble beginnings as a holding company for scattered rural systems to the coast-to-coast titan known as Spectrum, is the story of the American cable industry itself. It's a tale of consolidation and debt, of technological innovation and bare-knuckle competition. It's a company built by visionaries and dealmakers, survivors of bankruptcy and architects of mega-mergers. Today, it stands as a giant of connectivity, a company whose wires are woven into the very fabric of modern American life. But the wars are far from over. The battle between coax and fiber rages on street by street. The challenge of wireless 5G looms ever larger. And the fundamental question of what it means to be a cable company in a world of streaming still hangs in the balance. Charter has proven it can get bigger. Now it must prove it can adapt, evolve, and redefine itself for a future it helped create, but no longer completely controls. The spectrum of possibilities is wider than ever before.